Have you ever found yourself wondering what you absolutely have to recite in your prayer versus what's just, recommended? It can seem a little complicated, but today we're going to break down the Hanafi school's approach to prayer recitation. We're going to make it simple and super clear.
Okay, so to really get a grip on all of this, we have to start with this one crucial question. Because in Hanafi Fiqh, the difference between what's obligatory and what's necessary, well, it's not just about words. It's literally the key that unlocks the entire logic of how the prayer works.
And here is that key. On the left, we've got fard. These are the obligatory acts. Think of fard as the absolute concrete foundation of the prayer. It's established by definitive, undeniable proof, like a direct verse from the Qur'an. Then on the right, you have wajib, or necessary acts. This is like the steel framework that's built on that foundation. It's established by evidence that's really strong, but technically just short of definitive. So you've got the non-negotiable foundation and then the practically required framework built right on top.
So let's start with that foundation, the fard. This is the absolute bare bones minimum of recitation that you need for your prayer to even count. It's the starting point for everything.
The first fundamental rule is that the act of reciting something is in itself an obligation, a fardh. And what's interesting is, even though you only do it in the first 2 units of a prayer, the Hanafi school says that fulfills the obligation for the entire prayer. It's like the recitation in that first half does all the heavy lifting for the whole thing.
So how much do you actually have to recite for this absolute minimum? Just 1 verse. That's it. It's an incredibly accessible baseline, right? It makes sure that this core obligation can be met by pretty much anyone.
And the reasoning for this 1 verse minimum, it comes straight from this verse in the Qur'an. You see, the command here is absolute. It just says recite. It doesn't give a specific amount. And because this definitive text doesn't set a minimum, the scholars concluded that the smallest possible amount, 1 single verse, is enough to fulfill that core obligation.
But, it gets even more interesting. Because even within the school, there was this fascinating discussion. While Imam Abu Hanifa's position was that 1 verse is enough, his 2 main students, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, they argued for a slightly higher bar. 3 short verses, or 1 long one. And their logic was that you need at least that much for the miraculous, inimitable nature of the Qur'an to really shine through. It's just a brilliant peek into the depth of legal reasoning that was going on.
Okay, this next part might actually surprise you. Reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, as important as it is not considered fardh. Now, why is that? Well, it's because the evidence that makes Al-Fatiha a requirement comes from prophetic reports. And while those are super strong, they're considered presumptive evidence. They can't actually override that unqualified absolute command we just saw in the Qur'an. So Al-Fatiha, it belongs in our next category.
And that brings us to our next level up, the wajib, or the necessary recitation. This is that framework we were talking about, the part that's built directly on the fard foundation. This represents the standard, practical way to pray, based on how the Prophet Muhammad consistently prayed.
So what does this wajib part look like? Well, it has 2 parts that are going to be very familiar to you. Step 1, recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Step 2, recite another surah, or at least 3 short verses right after it. This combination is the core recitation that most of us do in every prayer.
So this leads to a really practical question, right? Since this isn't fard, what happens if you forget this part by mistake? Is your whole prayer invalid? The answer is no, but there is a fix. The system has this amazing built-in correction mechanism for when we make unintentional mistakes at this level.
And that fix is the prostration of forgetfulness, or sujud al-sahw. So if someone, say, accidentally forgets to recite a surah after Al-Fatiha, they can perform this simple prostration at the very end of their prayer to make it complete. It's just a really merciful and practical solution.
All right, and that brings us to our final layer, the Sunnah. These are the recommended practices. If fard is the foundation and wajib is the framework, then think of the Sunnah as the aesthetic polish. It's not required, but is what makes the prayer beautiful and brings it that much closer to the specific habits of the Prophet.
Now, one of the best-known recommendations is about varying the length of the surah depending on the prayer. You can see it here. Long surahs are recommended for Fajr and Zuhr, medium ones for Asr and Isha, and short ones for Maghrib. It just adds this beautiful rhythm and flow to the cycle of your daily worship.
And there are other little refinements too. For example, it's Sunnah to recite 1 whole surah instead of just bits and pieces of different ones. It's also recommended to make the first unit of the Fajr prayer a little bit longer than the second. And the reason for this one is just so thoughtful. It was to give people more time to wake up and catch the prayer with the congregation from the very beginning. So after going through all these different layers, let's just step back for a second and look at the complete structure. What we have is a really clear three-tiered system that covers everything from the absolute minimum all the way to the ideal form. And this just lays it all out perfectly. At the very bottom, you have the fard. That's our unbreakable foundation, just reciting one verse. Built on top of that is the wajib, the essential framework, a Fatiha plus another surah. And then, finishing it all off, you have the Sunnah, which is that aesthetic polish, the ideal form, like picking surahs of a specific length. Each layer just builds beautifully on the last.
And you know, that really leaves us with a final thought to ponder. How does this incredible balance of firm rules and flexible recommendations shape the act of worship itself? It creates a system that is both incredibly structured and deeply accessible, giving a clear path for everyone while also building in so much mercy, beauty, and practicality. It's a framework truly designed for all of us in all of our different circumstances.